we are starting off here. Just wanted to kind of let everybody know and thank everybody. Thank you guys and gals for showing up today as opposed to last week. We're using Teams here. Some house stuff. Andrew Wood is pulling up the presentation, and we'll be starting in just a couple more minutes. We have a lot more people coming in.
We'll just give people maybe 2 to 3 minutes so they can get in and settle down.
Yep, 2 to 3 more minutes, and then we'll start up the presentation. Again, we are going to be recording this presentation, so there will be access to this when we are done here. Sorry, I'm adding more people.
And just to let everybody know, this session will be recorded. So if you'd like to look back on it or reference it, you will have the ability to go back and look at it. So.
Awesome. Okay, so more and more people keep popping up. I keep adding more and more in here. Last week there were 84 people registered, and so with the craziness, I think maybe we'll have less people in here than last week, but still great. And then again, we'll be recording this, so if you guys need to watch this again, you can.
And while we wait for a few more people, if anybody did come to this meeting with a question in mind, we welcome you to use the Q&A section up at the top, and then we can get to all the questions at the end. So just wanted to toss that one out now.
Yeah. And we'll be answering a bunch of those questions at the very end of the presentation. So those of you that just arrived now, we're going to be just a couple more minutes. A bunch of people are still coming in, and then we will start presenting. We are recording this, so anybody can watch this and use this later on. If you have any questions as we're going through, please use the Q&A button that's between view and notes at the very top there to ask any questions, which we'll be answering at the end. Andrew, do you have the presentation?
I have it queuing up right now. It says preparing your slides. So, all right, can everybody see what is on the screen right now?
Nice.
I can see it, yep.
All right, perfect. Go ahead and kick it off, Matt.
Yeah, so this is interesting. We've been talking with Roger for quite a while. He and I have known each other for a long time, and we realized from ASI that what Roger and his team at Recall InfoLink are offering the industry is something that is very much needed and have been asked by many of our clients at ASI. So we decided to put together a presentation kind of walking through some of the secrets of product recalls that Roger and Andrew have seen throughout the many years. Roger will introduce himself and go into how many years he's been doing this. I think he's been doing this longer than I've been alive, maybe.
Perhaps.
And so we're going to be focusing a lot on obviously the recalls and how the system of Recall InfoLink works. All right, next slide. So if you've ever failed at product recalls in the past, it's not your fault. Product recalls are very, very complicated, and there are thousands every single year. And it's one of those things that really keeps all food safety and quality people awake at night. It really is the only thing really that probably keeps a lot of CEOs up at night. They may not say it all the time, but a Chipotle 2.0 for any organization would obviously devastate that company. The recalls keep people up at night. So if you've been concerned about that, we would love to help kind of with that process and maybe put you to ease at the end of this presentation. And if you ever thought that industry professionals want you to fail, you're probably right. It sounds crazy, but you're probably right. Everybody is a competitor, but within the space of your commodity, definitely nobody is interested in seeing a failure. Hey, Andrew, I lost the presentation here. Is it still up?
It is, yes.
How come I can't see it? Okay, whatever. All right, so next one. So our simple goal within this presentation is to help you solve recall pain without getting bogged down in all of the technical stuff. How to digitally comply with FSMA 204. FSMA 204, if you don't know, is the new FDA rule that has come out since January, January, and it is the new traceability food law, which requires everybody, really one requirement at the end of the day, it's a sortable spreadsheet within 24 hours with all the data that is needed for a recall. So that's very difficult to do if you're still using paper. And so this will teach you how to digitally comply with 204. Also, how to help you prevent any brand ruining outbreak and also avoid any costly litigation or actually going to jail. We've seen people go to jail because of outbreaks within the industry. That is definitely not what we want for you, our clients, or anybody really. And with that, you probably already know Andrew Wood, but let's have you introduce yourself, Andrew.
All right, perfect. So, hello everyone. My name is Andrew Wood. I'm the Director of Business Development here at ASI. I've been helping major brands, beverages, food companies, consumer goods companies, and everybody in that area help navigate the world of food safety since about 2016. So, I've helped people through GMP journeys, SQF, other GFSI standards, and it's been a good time. So, another thing that I do is help clients prevent recalls because this is one of the number one goals when it comes to food safety. And I get these kind of questions quite often. So, ASI, we are one of the largest service providers in North America, offering a variety of services that help prevent recalls and things that help you get to GMP or SQF certification. This includes, but it's not limited to, both training and consulting services. So what I'll do from here is hand it over to Roger so he can give you a brief introduction of himself.
Thanks, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for pulling this webinar together, and thank all of you who are participating. Briefly about myself, I spent 15 years with Albertsons leading their food safety and quality functions, and we did 250 recalls a year, and they all were miserable. And 15 years ago, I left through a variety of circumstances, saw this opportunity to improve this process that causes pain, as Andrew said, every day of the week. And so started Recall InfoLink, which helps manage the information flow connected to product recalls. Andrew's right, recalls can be avoided.
Yes, that is correct. And let's talk about how we can do that.
but sometimes things go wrong. And when things do go wrong, it's best to be prepared so that it's not a crisis. And so what we've been helping people do is turn recalls into a normal business process that can be repeatable because they've practiced on a regular basis. So with that, I'll be quiet. Back to you, Andrew. Thanks for the time. And
well,
Matt?
actually, we'll hand it over to Matt for his introduction.
Okay.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Matt Regusci, and been a long-time consultant for ASI and for CSQ. And so I currently manage the cannabis safety and quality scheme for ASI. But I'm also a traceability expert. I have another company called New Era Partners that my partner Andy Kennedy, he helped write the FSMA 204 rule in the FDA. And so this is near and dear. I'm going around the countryside right now, consulting different companies on how to make sure that they're compliant within the new rule for the FDA. And those companies are very large companies with massive supply chains and serve thousands of stores, thousands, tens of thousands of restaurants, and they're really trying to figure this out. So we knew this was timely, and we definitely wanted to get it out in front of you guys as well. So with that, we will start with the 4 secrets that we're going to be going through today. The first one is how to play defense and prevent recalls from happening. Andrew Wood is going to walk us through that with his knowledge of multiple audits and where we've been with the industry. 2, how to do an emergency recall within 30 minutes or less. Right now, that's the biggest problem with recalls. Even we see that with our audits, is when we're doing a mock recall with our clients, is, we'll start it off and sometimes it can take the whole entire audit to get that done. That means that that's product that's been on the shelf and people are consuming and buying over the last 8 hours or longer. So definitely the faster a recall can be done, the better it is for your brand. Also, how to use software, recall software to do an emergency recall accurately and without human error. That's another big problem with recalls, is the human error side of things, particularly since, you're stressed. Big deal, and now you're stressed, and so one wrong type of the key could ruin everything. And 4, how to find the time and get management on board to move from analog to digital recall processes. So we know that the biggest problem with anything in food safety is budget, and a lot of times people that control the budget sometimes don't see the value in a lot of things that we do. And so really trying to help you with understanding the value and being able to relay that to people within your organization as well. So with that, we'll start with Andrew and go ahead with the first secret.
All right, let's get this started. So, secret number 1, how to play defense to prevent recalls from happening. Now, this is very important. As we've discussed multiple times already, we do not want recalls, so taking the appropriate actions beforehand is crucial. So, let's talk about the most common forms of recalls. So, food recalls are quite common. A lot of people don't really understand how often they do happen, but for any of us who have been on the FDA website, we really do see these food recalls quite often. Now, a lot of times, whenever somebody thinks of a recall, and this is the average consumer, they're automatically going to think of maybe peanut butter, lettuce, or these other hot topics. But there are other recalls that aren't really discussed as often. And these are your more common ones, such as number 1, undeclared allergens. Maybe there was a mislabeling or something like this on the product, and that's going to force a recall. Number 2 is foreign materials. So this is including but not limited to any kind of plastics, metals, any kind of material that really doesn't belong in the product and that ends up getting in there. And then many others like pathogens. This is what we usually think about that I was referencing a minute or 2 ago with the peanut butter and the lettuce and so on. So, secret number 1 is, what do you do or how to play defense from recalls happening? So, number 1, are recalls avoidable? Yes. A food safety plan can decrease the recall by up to 90% when it is used continuously to improve the recall process through better recall simulations. So here's the bottom line. If you don't have these things written down, if you don't have a traceability program and you can't successfully find the product, it's going to make this recall a nightmare. If you have absolutely everything documented, you have a full traceability program, you can tell which ingredient went to which product, and you have the supporting SOPs and forms, it's just going to ease the process so much. So, are recalls avoidable? Yes, they are with the proper steps. So, case study. Here's one thing that I want to throw out there. ASI can actually help develop a plan that includes preventive controls and associated SOPs. So, say if we work with a company that doesn't have a food safety plan and they have a recall, and then we work with one that does have a recall, that company that has the proper documentation is going to make it a much more seamless transition, so or process, I should say. Now, on top of that, any type of third-party audit, whether we're talking about GMP audits, SQF audits, they typically require a recall simulation. So it's always important to be able to do this quickly and effective too. So yes, have the right documentation in place. Make sure that you go through mock recalls, and let's discuss those a little bit more. And I think that's a good transition to actually secret number 2, which is how to do an emergency recall in 30 minutes or less. So we talked about the importance of SOPs, forms, and now I'll kick it over to, are you taking this one, Roger?
Sure.
All right, perfect. I'll kick it over to Roger for this.
Before we run into that, Roger, I'd love to know
Go ahead.
kind of a statistic. We talk about undeclared allergens and foreign materials. We see that all the time in within the FDA for recalls. What are the percentage of that versus everything else, or even allergen mislabeling?
I don't have an exact number, but generally speaking, a third of recalls are due to labeling problems. Most of the labeling problems are undeclared allergens. So about a third of all recalls are a result of labeling problem, and the biggest percentage of those 33% is due to undeclared allergens. That's the latest numbers that I've seen.
Which is awesome for everybody on this call to understand that just by getting your labels correct, you've taken yourself out of 33%
That's right.
of the potential. So getting the labeling SOP done correctly and everybody on board and trained up will help immensely. But yeah, I thought that was interesting, because I always see that a lot, is the vast majority of recalls some weird thing like a labeling thing. So I just want to know, because I know you see, how many recalls do you see a year, Roger?
More than 2,000 recalls are processed through our system a year. We look even more broadly than that, but directly we handle more than 2,000 recalls a year. Wow. And the thing to point out about the labeling is you could have your labels right, and then you change your formula, or you change your ingredient, or you change your supply for an ingredient that tweaks the need for declaration just a little bit. And so what was a correct label might not be a correct label. So it's important that you have the label review process in an ongoing way tied into your manufacturing process, so that when there are changes, those changes are reflected on the labels. So it's not just having it right at one point in time, it's having a process to keep it right as things change.
So that one little thing could save companies a lot of money, and insurance companies a lot of money. All right, great. Okay, so secret number 2, how to do an emergency recall within 30 minutes or less.
The best way to do a recall in an emergency situation in 30 minutes or less is to have practiced before you have to do a recall. That's the best way. Digitizing recalls is the way in general to compress the amount of time that it takes so that you can process recalls quickly. We have a client, as with every single one of our clients, who, when we started the conversation, oh yeah, we have a way to do that. And the way to do that involved management people and phone lists and phone calls and communication and then documentation. They decided, and it was manual, they decided, let's digitize this. Let's move into the 21st century. Let's use cloud deployed software so that we can make this faster and easier. And now one staff person. So before it was 5 management people, 8 hours, so a total of 40 hours of management time to process a recall. Not document the returns, the responses, just to process the recall out. 40 hours. Today, with a digitized system on a common platform for their recall receivers, the responders, points of sale, as well as them to use, takes 2 hours of staff time. So a 20-fold, this, 10x is way easier to achieve, but they actually achieved a 20x reduction in the amount of time required to process the recall. And they have a better result on the back end because all of their actions and all of their customers' actions are documented in real time. So transitioning, I'll be the first one to say there's a little bit of a hump, a little bit of extra effort that's needed to move from a manual process to a digital process. But the gain that you realize is incrementally beyond the investment that it takes to get there. So I would say moving to digitalization is going to be the tool that lets you compress the amount of time into 30 minutes. And practicing is going to be the process that lets you employ the tool to get you to 30 minutes. So it's really a two-part answer: a technology solution and practice. Thanks for asking, Matt.
Yeah.
All right, and now we have a case study, the happy inspector.
So here's an illustration, different client. And these are stories that our clients tell us. The inspector comes because they're checking on the Belvita recall that happened last week or some other recall that happened recently. And a bunch of people go to the file cabinet, they pull mountains of files, they take them to the conference room and they sit around. And the questions start coming from the effectiveness check officer, and the paper starts shuffling, the papers start flying, and people aren't happy, and the answers are incomplete. And everybody, after several hours, kind of says, okay, well, I guess that's good enough. But with a digitized solution and documented activity, all of this can be compressed onto a screen or two. So our client told me the last time the inspector came in, the effectiveness check officer came in, poured him a cup of coffee. We went into my office. We opened our Recall InfoLink account. I found the recall that he was asking about. I opened the reports. I showed him all the customers that we communicated with. I showed him when we communicated with them, showed them the customers that needed more than one communication to actually take the action, showed him the instructions that we gave, the product attribute set. And again, after a half an hour, the effectiveness check officer is happy. The business is happy because it's been minimal interruption and everybody ends with a better result, less stress, and can get back to their real jobs, not the recall jobs, but their real jobs a lot faster. So again, it's moving this process into a digital format on a common platform so that all the data that's captured can be reported on quickly and easily and efficiently. That makes inspectors happy, both at the point of sale and at the company offices when they have questions about recalls that have happened recently.
So one of the things here, I mean, you were talking about going from 40 hours down to 2 hours. And, we're talking about how to do a recall within 30 minutes or less. I'm assuming, some of the bigger companies that are doing 250 recalls a year, like you said, like Albertsons, et cetera, they're doing it within 30 minutes. What are you seeing your average client, like our type of clients? What are you seeing when they do recalls? How fast are they doing it? Are they doing it within 30 minutes? Are they doing it within 2 hours? If they practice enough, can they get it down to 30 minutes? What is that? What is that kind of on-ramp time? I know you said that there's a hump, but what kind of goes in that hump and what makes this process faster over a period of time?
So let me give you 3 answers because I can understand how the 2-hour window is a little bit confusing. The 2 hours at our client used to be 40 hours, now it's 2 hours. 2 hours was the complete process. Notification of stores, store response back, the whole thing's done. 2 hours. Not just notification that used to take 40 hours. Now the whole process takes 2 hours. Another thing that you can do with recalls that are digitized is you can do statistics. The more than 2,000 recalls that were processed through our system last year took, on average, 17 minutes and 45 seconds between when our client logged in to our system, started entering data, and then pushed go. We had recalls that had over 150 items in them. We had recalls that had over 10,000 customers in them. Lots of products, lots of standard attribute data, lots of customers, average 17 minutes and 45 seconds.
Really? 17 minutes?
That's right.
Wow. So we weren't even exaggerating with 30-minute recall or less.
That's right. That's right. Now, to be fair, it may take a bit of time to collect the data, to generate the customer list, to generate the product list. And that's why practice is so critical. Because if you know how to describe your customers and you know how to describe your products using GS1 attribute data, then collecting data, preparing it to put it into a digitized system is fast and easy. But if there hasn't been practice, it could take a little bit longer than 17 minutes. Again, that's the average.
So this kind of leads us into the next slide of secret number 3, and I have a question for you on that as well. So it says how to use recall software to do an emergency recall accurately and without human error. And you've mentioned multiple times about practicing. As we go into this, how, when you're talking to your clients, how, and they ask you, I'm sure they ask you, like, how often should I be practicing or whatever? What do you say to them? Like, what do you think the right amount of time or times to practice on an annualized basis?
Yeah, great question. Part of it is company specific. You know, a company that has multiple plant locations, a big SKU, a big product list, probably needs to be thinking about this a little bit more frequently than smaller, more simple companies. It's easy to say that at least one time a year, every company should be going through a recall simulation. And I was really happy to see that Andrew used that word, because recall simulation means you actually practice doing a recall. It doesn't mean you just found out what the product is and where it's located. You actually thought through, how am I going to communicate? What are the proper disposition directions? How am I going to manage the data flow? How am I going to tell them to return product? All of those kinds of things. So it's important to practice a simulation as opposed to what commonly is referred to as a mock recall. So at least once a year. I think a best practice is to do a recall simulation based on finished product production problems. So a finished product problem is the scenario that you're practicing, is number one. Number two, an ingredient problem. There wasn't a problem in our processing, but something that came in was contaminated or had too much foreign material or whatever that translated into the need for recall. So first, finished product, second, ingredient. And then a best practice also, third, is to consider food contact packaging or finished product packaging. This is where the labeling comes in, you know, improper labeling or some defect in the seal of the package or something like that. So a best practice is 3 times a year, minimum is once a year, and to do an actual simulation of a recall as opposed to simply a traceability exercise is what we see translates into faster and easier recalls when the need arises. Good question, Matt.
Yeah. So right here, the going back to that slide, digital recall process is up to 500 times faster to learn and execute than an analog process that you're doing today. When you say analog, do you mean just kind of emailing out and all that?
Well, believe it or not, today we're in 2023. I think the first fax was processed commercially back in the 70s. But there still are companies that do recalls via fax. Sometimes they have to, because they're in a area where they don't have Wi-Fi. They're in a remote rural area and they're still connected to the internet through a landline or something like that, or just a fax machine. So faxing still happens, phone calling still happens, emailing still happens. It takes time to do those processes to get the message out. And people don't often think, but it also means that that same amount of time or more is going to have to be spent receiving the responses from all those customers that you called, answering the questions from all those customers that you called, and compiling all that data that comes in. You know, we had one client who said, yeah, we used to notify 250 stores and it wasn't too bad. We had a group email list, but then we had to open 250 emails, look at their response, put it into a spreadsheet, and it just took hours and hours. So the 500x means that you save money on the outbound process. I mean, you save time on the outbound process and you save time on the inbound process. And as we've already pointed out, you save time on the extended process, like working with the regulators or claiming the proper credit from your supplier. So there's savings all over the place with digital recalls.
Yeah, and with your 2,000 recalls that you do approximately through your system per year, how often do you see response on the first email or text message or phone call? Because Recall InfoLink, they demoed this for Andrew and I. It was really cool. And it does email, texting, and phone calling of people, even all the way down to consumer level, or I should say up to the consumer level. But how many times are you seeing that has to happen before people actually respond back on average?
Yeah, great question. We see two different groups. We see one group that has a relationship with their customers as an owned relationship, you know, vertically integrated. They get faster response times because the DM carries a bigger hammer. And the groups where an independent distributor is supplying points of sale, whether it's restaurants or kiosks or retailers or institutional schools, things like that, the response time there generally is slower. Our system will send an initial notice +3 reminders. And typically on the vertically integrated owned side, two communications, the initial and a single reminder, gets, you know, more than 90% response. On the independent side, we see it often can be all 4 communications and maybe not quite to the 90% response level. So yeah, good question. We also do this re-notification where we cycle through the communications a second time, and that usually brings response up to the, you know, near 100%.
Wow, so it takes like 4 communications to get to that.
Often, yeah.
Wow. So that would be a human being on the phone or emailing a 4th time to get to that response.
Yeah.
Which goes into the next slide about decreasing labor. So going digital makes recall process faster and easier. Kind of walk us through this, Roger.
Well, one of our clients said a red light goes off in the office, and that indicates to them that they need to notify their 150 stores, and they had a process for notifying their 150 stores that took them on average, they would say dozens of hours. It was a very costly exercise. And part of the challenge that they had was first getting accurate information from their supplier. So they spent time on the phone with their supplier getting accurate information because it wasn't digitized, it wasn't presented to them in a standard format. So they had to get the right information. Which lot codes did you sell us? When did you sell it to us? What were the POs? once they got the right information, then they would turn it into a series of phone calls and emails and text messages. And they told us that on average, that took them the better part of a week to make sure that all 150 stores got the information that they needed so that they could take action. So 5 days, and we see recalls, and when there's a lag, as Matt already pointed out, when there's a lag, of a day or 2 or 3 or 4, that means that product is on the shelf, causing liability and exposure to the consumer, to the brand, to the retailer. And so now they tell us, they put the recall data, they have a better way of getting their supplier to provide them information with an invitation process. And then they take that information that comes in a standard format and continue it out to their stores. Now they have 450 stores, so they have 3 times more stores. And they went from 1 week to 1 day for completing the entire process. So by the end of 1 day, they've notified all 450 stores, and all 450 stores have taken action, and all 450 stores have responded back, and all 450 stores have been properly tabulated and reported on. So it really is, hard to get your mind around how much a recall process, the convoluted nature of a recall process, can be simplified and streamlined with digitized information to produce a better outcome. And really, if we focus on, it's a better outcome, which means product gets off the shelf, which means the liability exposure is reduced. It's easier to process with accurate data, and everybody sleeps better at night.
Yeah, the sleep better at night is key. This is, as you're going through this, I'm really understanding too the difference between the mock recall versus recall simulation, because once you figure out where 1 step forward, 1 step back, it kind of stops right there for the majority of people when they're practicing. Where this, in terms of a simulation, you're really acting as if this is a true recall and really trying to get all the processes down, which is probably going to change a lot of SOPs as well.
Yeah, great comment, Matt, because the crisis in a recall is much less internal than it is external. Internally, you can get your hands around, okay, we made 2 lot codes between June 1st and June 17th, and we shipped them here. That's pretty straightforward. But when you start thinking, now what are we going to tell them? How are we going to protect our brand in a messaging that lets them know what went wrong, what they need to do? How are we going to get that information to them accurately? Are we going to give it to our 10 salespeople and say, go and play telephone tag with your customers? And if each of 10 people have 10 customers, are all 10 going to get the same message? When you start thinking, oh man, that's the crisis, that's the hair on fire. And if you can compress that into, I'm going to put all my data into one place. I'm going to push go. And I know that all of my clients are going to get exactly the same information with exactly the same instructions that relate to them. And I can tell them which PO they bought and which day I shipped it and where I delivered it to. And it really can streamline and strategically process a recall so it reduces waste, it reduces labor, it reduces liability, and it produces a better result. Yeah, it's the difference between a recall that's kind of been practiced but still causes a crisis, and a recall that's been simulated and so can be repeated as a normal business process. That's the difference.
Yeah, so as we move into the next and the final secret 4, how to find the time to, and get management on board to change, right? Because change is the most hardest thing to overcome in every organization and operation and industry, but particularly hard in the food industry. And there's people here in the cannabis industry. So yeah, it's fascinating to kind of look into that. But as we move into that secret, I want you to tell them, I think you said that there are 3 things that happen in a recall, and and every single company has a different way of doing all 3 things. But I feel like in this, you kind of standardize those 3 things. Do you want to kind of go over those 3 things? I think it's 3 things. Is that right?
3 is a great number. So you have some defective product. If there's no defective product, there's no recall. You have some customer base that you sold the defective product to. Because again, if you didn't sell it, you don't have to recall it. It might be defective and you might have to dispose of it, or you might have to repackage it. You might have to correct the defect, but you don't have to recall it. So the first problem is a defective product or products. The second thing is customers that you sold that product to that you have to recover. And the third thing is instructions. You have to tell your customers what to do with the defective product that you sold them. It could be dump and destroy, it could be return to reclamation, it could be we're going to come pick it up. There's a handful of different possible disposition directions. But if you don't have those 3 things, you don't have a recall. If you have those 3 things, defective product, some people that you sold it to, and some instructions, then doing those 3 things in a standard way makes it replicatable for you, makes it easy to understand for your customers, and produces a better outcome in the end. Yep, it's real simple. 3 things. They're done about 100,000 different ways today in the US because there's no standard. But working together with GS1 and trade associations, we're building a common platform that standardizes everything so that the data can be exchanged and acted upon quickly.
So those 3 things, just want to repeat that. One is you have to have a product that needs to be recalled, some sort of problem with that product.
A defect.
Yeah. Second is you have customers or consumers or whatever that have bought the product or somewhere in the supply chain. And third, you need to explain to them what they need to do with that product. And I like that because in the old way, the recall, just looking one step further forward, one step back, a lot of times there is no practice of that communication. And depending upon what the defect is, could be a multitude of different ways of dealing with the product, which goes back to that practice, understanding the different ways in which you could have your product recalled, but standardize then how you deal with that recall in the future as well. Maybe even having that written out in your SOP. Here are the 5 different things depending upon, like a process flow. If this happens, this is what we do with our product. If this happens, this is what we want done with our product. Knowing all of those things probably be very beneficial just moving forward as well.
Yeah, I mean, 2 extreme examples. When I was at Albertsons, we did the only mad cow recall that's ever been done in this country. And we had to produce for the USDA a certificate of incineration for all of the recalled product.
That is a big barbecue.
It had to be a certificate of incineration to a certain temperature at a certain time and a certain location. So the disposition was send the product to an incinerator and have a document that shows that it was effective, processed correctly. In Recall InfoLink, one of our recalls was lime sherbet because it wasn't the right color of green. The disposition directions weren't incinerate, they were dispose at your discretion, which I know translated into lime sherbet break room parties in most retailers because there was nothing wrong with the lime sherbet. It was just the wrong color green. So you didn't want to disappoint your customers, but you could sure make your employees happy. So those are kind of like bookends. There's, several things that could happen in between those 2.
Got it. Okay, so we have the slide up right now. That's kind of funny. Those are two very um, polar opposites of that pendulum. But you said here digital recalls cost 5x less than analog process that you're doing today. And that's just the measurable expenses. So you want to kind of go through that and what is measurable, like tangible, and what is not?
Yeah, well, the first question is 5x doesn't seem like 20x or 500x like you've been talking before. There are kind of three categories of expenses with recalls. The biggest category usually is product credit, the amount of product that has to be credited. Our system doesn't affect how much product is in the supply chain, and so it doesn't really affect the product reimbursement for recall product. The second bucket is how much labor it actually takes at the point of sale to process the recall. Now, we reduce that labor a little bit because standardized messaging delivered quickly and efficiently that that itemizes exactly the attributes that need to be looked at on the product can produce some faster responses at the store, the ability to scan a product with a handheld or a tablet for response purposes also can streamline a little bit. But the biggest streamlining of costs come at the administrative end. Because you're able to administratively process the recall so much faster. So in the illustration where the red light went off and it took them a week to get the message out to all 150 stores, and now they do 450 stores in less than a day. That reduction in labor is a significant reduction in labor, but as an overall cost of the recall, it's only a fraction. So the administrative part of the recall process is where we provide the most tangible benefit in terms of labor and cost reduction. A streamlined, consistent information to our clients' customers, again, be they retailers or food service establishments or veterinary offices or Starbucks kiosks, whoever, presenting the information standard way and giving them a platform to respond back helps a little bit, but it doesn't actually move product. We don't move product around in recalls. And so the 5x is because what we really impact is only a portion of the whole.
So on this one is surprise CEO.
Yeah, and what our system does is it documents all of this effort, all these communications, all the customers, all the responses. And through the documentation, it allows for easier insurance claim processing. And the insurance companies tell us that when they get claims for product recalls from companies that have used our system, it's way easier to process because it's all documented so nicely. So the surprise CEO kind of is a combination of the stories that I've told so far. Because most CEOs' interaction with recalls is, my team has it handled. I have a team, they do this work, they have it handled. A surprise on the downside is when they think, I have a team, I have it handled, and then they have to do a manual recall of lots of products and they have to work nights and weekends to get it done. And the surprise is, I didn't know it was going to be so time intensive. I didn't know it was going to put my people under so much stress. I didn't know the economic impact that it was going to have on my brand and on my sales and profitability. So you can be surprised. Lots of CEOs are surprised in that way because they just didn't engage. It was like, my team, they have it handled.
Right.
You can be surprised.
It's like any other thing in the food safety program, right? It's like, yeah, we have an SOP for that. We have process for that. You know, like,
We have it written down. Where is it? It's in my head.
or collecting dust on the shelf or
Yeah,
whatever
right.
it is, right?
Here it
And
is.
you know, we have our DFSI audit, or we do our GMP and HACCP, and yeah, my team does swimmingly every single time. We get a certificate and high score, no problem, right? And but the thing is most companies, luckily, don't actually get a real life recall scenario, you know, for a long time, right? I mean, it could happen the first year, it could happen year 20, but because it's one of those, it's kind of on the paper, or like what you said, in somebody's head. Yeah, they think it's covered, but it's not practiced. It's not one of those that is used on a daily basis.
That's right. But the surprise that the food safety team wants to have their CEO experience is like the surprise that a CEO from a small distributor, well, medium-sized distributor in the Northwest West told me after they made the change to our system. He said, well, the way I engaged with it prior was kind of, as I just described, have a team, they have it covered. Then they went through onboarding with your system, and the report I got was the onboarding was simple. It took less time to onboard than it did to run a regular recall. And now my team tells me they're better prepared to handle recalls when they come in. And so what I thought was good enough turned out to not be good enough in today's environment. What I thought was good enough is now handled better because the team is more confident. They have a tool that they're comfortable with, and it all happened pretty easily. So that's the kind of surprise, you know, when you think about food safety culture and how you want to bring your executive team into the food safety culture of the company. It's those kind of surprises where the CEO can be like, well, I thought we were good enough, but now I know we're good enough. Those kind of surprises that I think are worthwhile, that our clients have actually communicated to us.
And that kind of goes to the next one about recall ready community. I know you've been talking about this a lot. You've been in different conferences. I've heard you speak on this. What is a recall ready community, and how do you want to see that kind of happen within the future?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. What we see data across 10,000 recalls by now, at least, is recalls aren't an individual company problem. Recalls are a supply chain problem. It's not that an individual company can't process a recall relatively well by themselves. It's when you put them in the context of their supply chain, things seem to fall apart. And so if a recall ready mindset extends beyond the four walls of a business to their trading partners, then we're going to see a lot smoother data flow. We're going to see a lot faster actions, because what having an awareness outside of your four walls to your trading partners means is I'm going to know what they're going to do if they process a recall, and they're going to know what I expect them to do if they're processing a recall with me. So it's that knowledge of how recalls are processed and what expectations there are between companies that really is going to see the big lift in recall performance. And so we call the recall supply chain a community. It's an individual company's community, the way that they go to market their supply chain.
So it's taking those three things that everybody has to do in a recall and kind of standardizing it so it's not 100,000 different ways of doing it.
Within one's own trading partners.
Yeah.
So you don't have to, so if you're a fruit juice company, you don't have to be recall ready with a meat packer. But you should be recall ready with the source of the fruit that's going into your juice, even if it's a South America, company in Chile or someplace like that. And you should be recall ready with your customers if your customers are distributors or points of sale, or even consumers, everybody should know this. When a recall happens, this is how we do it. And this is what our expectations are of ourselves and of you, so that it all works well.
And I know that's one thing, going to the next slide, because we have 5 minutes left. I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. So we were actually creating that community as a digital thing as well for people to work together. But when Andrew Wood and I were looking at this demo and hearing Roger talk at a conference, I was like, this is exactly what a lot of our clients need. But we wanted to make it even better and easier for ASI clients. So we put together a package for our clients. And so right now, like the Recall Ready community, anybody who joins with Roger and his team at Recall InfoLink would become part of that community, which will have like a Facebook and LinkedIn community to kind of just talk to each other. And then also, one of the things that was when Roger and I were talking and Wood and I were talking with him, one of the things that is that 4-hour setup in the beginning is really putting that roadmap and documentation, all of those process flows, the different ingredients, all that different type of stuff in one spot. And so what we wanted to do was provide that documentation ahead of time. And so usually that is like a $2,000 value, like consulting, but that documentation will be part of this as well, so that there's no need. I mean, you got to fill in the blanks, right? But there's it takes away you creating all of that within the software itself, so it makes it a lot easier. Again, being a part of that community, I was talking about LinkedIn, Facebook group. So that will be part of this. We also at ASI, anytime our clients end up in an outbreak, we at ASI end up in an outbreak as well. So we want to minimize that. So we're trying to make this as give as much away, so as many of our clients will end up on this as well. So we even like wanted to put like 50% off of any of our trainings that we have, and we have a bunch of different trainings, pass up overview of food safety, any of the cannabis side place of training as well, because I know we have some cannabis folks on here for the CSQ side that also works for that. So we wanted to give 50% off of any training. And then unlimited recall practice. Usually Roger has a cap of 3 recalls per account. That's either real or like real live recalls, something just happened and I need to pull product, or simulated recalls. But we really wanted our clients to have the ability to practice as much as they yeah, so we convinced Roger to give you guys unlimited. Poor Roger, he's like, oh, fine, okay, well, I'll give you that too. But we wanted to make sure that you guys had the ability to train up everybody on this as well. And so that next slide is kind of how you guys can sign up. This is going to be one of a multitude of different ones. We're really trying to get our clients on board. So the next slide here shows where you can sign up for that. And the process for the cost of that digital recall is $995 per year, which we thought was pretty good. A lot of software costs a ton of money in the food safety world. But what we liked about Roger's software at Recall InfoLink was that it does one thing. It doesn't have 100 different tools or modules. It is specifically designed for recalls. So it's an easy software to come in. You put your materials in, and then you practice, and it's $995 per year. So if you want to sign up for that, just click on that link, which is recallinfolink.com. I think that's a capital L and ASI, and from there you can sign up, and then you'll be billed later. If you have any questions at all, just let us know and we can answer those for you as well. But are there any Q&A before we sign off? I know I asked you guys a ton of questions as we were going through. And Andrew, do you see any Q&A on there?
No, I just posted one comment in the section where it is the Q&A, and I said feel free to post any questions here, but I haven't seen any pop up.
Wow. I guess.
And there's also, you can also raise your hand if you want to click that and you have a specific question as well. And we can allow your microphone if you'd like to speak.
Awesome. And again, we will, this video is 2 hours long, so I'm guessing there's an hour ahead of it of nothing.
We'll chop it down
We'll
and send it to everyone.
And we'll send it out to everybody, yeah. Roger, did you want to add anything before we go?
Well, I want to thank you. Thank you, Matt and Andrew, for this opportunity. And thank you to all of those who listened in. Our core value is service. You know, as you mentioned, Matt, there's one thing we do recalls. We do them pretty well by now, had lots of practice, and we serve our clients, and we would love to serve any of the ASI clients, and love to make a transition for them if that works. Yep, happy to do that.
Very good. Perfect. Well, thank you guys and gals. And on that, we'll sign off.
Thank you, everyone.